Okay, welcome to another edition of American Cultural Shifts. My guest this evening is Dr. Elizabeth Walker. Elizabeth is a professor of animal science at Missouri State University, and Beth and I have been friends for well over a decade now. So Beth is really quite a remarkable person. Got her PhD in animal science in 2002, I think, from the University of Missouri, right, Beth?
Mm-hmm.
And you've been teaching at Missouri State since then.
Since then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I thought, Beth, we might start to talk about in this edition, kind of about the changes that you are seeing in the student body. Now, you started teaching in 2002 or 2003.
Basically,
That was kind of the tail end of the Gen Xers. So you've gone through the millennials and now you're into the Gen Z crowd. And I just wondered, what changes do you see in those student bodies? Do you see any differences in their characteristics and their expectations? What do you think?
I think what I have seen is a perpetual change. Every year they're a little different, and it's propelling a certain direction. And I think I don't think I'm the only one that's seen this. I think that before with my classes, they were a little bit harder working. They might have, worked on the unassigned problems. Even if I didn't say you should work on these, chapter assignments or chapter problems, they would probably go ahead and do them just because they maybe figured out after the first test that, she pulls a few from there. And now what I see are students who say, well, you don't give us a study guide, so how am I supposed to study? And I have students, and I'm pretty obvious when I teach. I tell them, you guys say in organic chemistry, you guys have to know these, 15 functional groups. And the first test comes through and it's like a big shock. They had to know them. And I'm just like, but I told you, I said, this will be 20 points on your test, and you didn't even bother to look at them. And so I think I've seen that as a progressive shift of hand-holding. And my generation, I wasn't about to beg for anything. I don't see you run into any professor begging for, what's going to be on the test and crying because you just couldn't figure it out. And this group of students, they are different. And I will say that it's probably a lot to do with social media and the instant gratification and other.
So talk about that. So how does that work in your mind?
Well, with the social media and instant gratification, they're watching TikTok, and I watch TikTok too. There's some guy from Australia who likes to talk about cattywampus stuff that I think is really funny. And then, there's all sorts of funny ones. This guy that gardens, I think he's super cool. So I'm following him on how does he garden and how is he, growing those things. But if it's more than about 30 seconds, my brain is off. And so now I've got organic chem students, and after about 30 seconds, their brain is off, and I'm just stuck. Like, what do I do? I've got to entertain them now for, and it's that up and down, up and down. And I think as an effective teacher, I've almost got to be much more part comedian and part professor. And then I, with my physiology students, I had a stomping mad, fit with them the other day because I asked them a question and they just stared at me. And it was something that, cholesterol is the backbone for all the what hormones. And they just stare at me. And I've gone over this with them so many times. And then finally I stomped my foot and I said, put your notes away. We're having a quiz. And I gave them the mother of all quizzes. I scared them to death. And then I was like, okay, my temper tantrum's over, but you guys have got to start studying. You've got to start participating. And after that, boy, their hands were raised. They knew the answers, but it's the give me generation. I don't have to give her anything. And I just threw a fit.
Beth, would you, now this is just conjecture here on my part. So I'm wondering, okay, when you and I went through our studies, right? If you wanted to go look something up, it was a bit of a pain, right? We went to the library. Sometimes we went to There was usually a computer sitting there, and you would go find it in the stacks. You would find the article, you would photocopy it, you would highlight it. And that was sometimes an hour-long ordeal.
Oh, yeah.
But you did invest the time in learning that. And so that had a way, at least in my mind, of making it stick. Now, and I'm like everybody else. I have a question that pops into my head. I get my phone out, tap, 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 and there it goes. It's almost instantaneous, but I oftentimes don't retain it because I didn't put that much effort into learning it. Is that something that you see? Is they kind of want that sort of that sugar rush, if you will, of there, I got it.
Yeah, it probably is that adrenaline rush. They know the answer and then moving on, and they don't have to retain it. And so maybe that is it, because I remember going to the card catalog and trying to find, and then you had to write it down, and then I'd get lost in the library and stuff, and who knows what you could find. And now we can find it super easy. And I wonder, why do they even need me anymore?
Do they attend class?
Not like they used to before COVID.
So post-COVID attendance down.
Way down. And I was listening to a guy from St. Angelo. He's like one of the principals or something. And they had recorded him at a school board meeting. And I just saw it today. And that's what he was saying is it's like he was teaching for 35 years, but he feels like he's on year 2 now. Year 2 post-COVID, post-March that everything shut down. It's like a whole new story with education. And the stuff he was talking about, I was like, it's in college too.
Yeah. Beth, is there an upside to this? Is there an upside to, hey, things are very fast now, right? I'm not going to go to the library and go photocopy, right? I'm going to get it. What's the upside, do you
I think what we're doing right now is an upside. We're Zoom meeting. We are, over 100 miles apart and able to communicate about a topic. And so what we have forced to do, and I will say the president of my university did an excellent job when Missouri State shut down for COVID. It was right before our spring break. He gave us an additional week so that we could get our courses all moved over to online format. And I tell you, I don't know what I would have done had he not done that. It would have been horrible because I had to learn a bunch of stuff. I wasn't that good on Blackboard, whereas where we post everything, I didn't know how to do a recorded lecture. I didn't know how to do Zoom. And he gave us that week, he gave us the tools we needed, and we got it all done. And not all universities had a president who was that wise.
Forward thinking.
Yeah, he nailed it on that one. He sure did. And I think that
go ahead.
The Zoom was actually kind of fun in a way. Because, for that, it wasn't, because I just recorded everything and went from there. But then the next year, when we were Zooming our classes live, it allowed my students to see a different perspective of me. I was just telling you about the cats walking around, and then the kids. And then during the day, I'd have chickens in my garage and they would be making their noise. And the students would just start giggling, and they would want to know more about me and my life. And then they would talk about their chickens and their kids and their this and their that. And so in a way, it was kind of fun. And I've used Zoom now. If the weather's bad during the winter, I'm like, guys, I'm not going in. I will see you at 9 a.m. on Zoom. And we Zoom.
From the student's perspective, this sort of very rapid fire, get information. Are they capable of learning more, Beth, do you think, because it's so quick, or no?
Nope, no way.
No way.
No, and you know how the brain works. You know how learning works. And I have them, they're supposed to read a book called Spark, which is all about how exercise affects the brain. And it talks about how repetition works with neurons and gets them to grow. And then if you exercise, there's this stuff called BNFD or something like that. And they call it the miracle grow. It's a growth hormone essentially for the brain. And I'm like, and guys, if you exercise, don't just get on the treadmill, but go for a trail run, do aerobics, whatever. It really helps those neurons help make connections. And this year, before, I'd have half the class would have read the book by now. This year, they're just like, so should we read that book? And I'm like, I told you that way a long time ago. It's great extra credit, but you have to read it. And it to me, and I've got all these teaching tips on my Blackboard and lectures on how to learn and YouTubes on how to learn. Nah, they don't take the time. If it is not something that they can memorize, then they're just like, meh. But to apply it, when I ask him these essay questions and they're actually supposed to be able to connect some dots, that's crazy talk.
Beth, one more question kind of along the lines of students. Do you think, and so I'll just, one little factoid here. So applications to college and matriculation to college, as you probably know, is down for the first time in a while.
About 20 years.
Tell me, I mean, so why do you think that is?
The biggest reason is there's fewer students. We have a
Fewer
smaller
students,
population. We have a smaller population. There's only a few states whose populations have increased. Texas is one of them. But the number of high school kids graduating is down, and it's going to continue to be down for years. And so we just had to talk about this at Faculty Senate the other day. And that's, we were on a boom and now we're on a bust. And that's just how it is. There's just fewer students. And then we've got the A+ program, and we've got courses that can transfer from high school. And we've got, the community colleges, the junior college, whatever, that the students who are very bright and have done well in school can go for free. And so that's kind of hurt us a little bit. But I think too, it's the Mike Rowe sort of thing, is that they've seen that it's going to take them how long to pay off those student loans, where they could just go be a plumber and make $100,000 a year. And why do they want that degree in psychology when they can go be a plumber, an electrician, or whatever else, a welder? I mean, my son's, both of his parents have PhDs, in academics. And my oldest son's like, I'm not going to college. And I'm like, okay, maybe he'll change his mind. Maybe he won't. He's certainly bright enough. He's got a lot of common sense. He's got a great work ethic, but he has zero interest in going to college right now. And I'm not going to press him. If he wants to go, that's great. I'll help him do it. But I'm not going to waste his time, my time, with something he doesn't want to do.
I get it.
And I would recommend parents. I've had some students in the past who are only in college because their parents forced them. And that's not the reason to be in college.
That's a bad reason. Yeah. Beth, I'm going to shift gears here a little bit and talk a little bit more about the academic side of this as opposed to the teaching side. I mean, in your role, you're certainly, big responsibility is teaching. You've also got research and publication and professional responsibilities there. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So for the scientific literature that you follow, presumably in the animal sciences and physiology and so forth, Beth, do you think, does culture influence what gets published? And in particular, I guess what I'm getting at is, does it affect who or what gets published, or both?
There's always been a little bit of that. If you had, if you were from a zoo and you were doing certain kind of swine research and genetic research and reproductive research, your name carried a lot. And it should. They put the time and effort, and their research was outstanding. I'm not saying that nobody from there ever got a paper pulled, because they did, when they realized, maybe one of their postdocs didn't quite do what they were told. But for the most part, if you're from one of these big institutions, you're going to be able to get published if you've got quality work. Small university, especially in my field with small ruminants, I mean, there's 15, 20 of us. Now there's probably more than that in the nation that do some research, but from the agricultural standpoint, it's a lot different, I think, in publications than maybe psychology or biology or medical physiology and all that kind of stuff. It's probably a lot different in my field, just because we're so much smaller. PhDs in agriculture that are at universities get paid more than biology professors or chemistry professors, because there's fewer of us. I know, I was shocked too, but we have higher salaries, and it was even pointed out at Faculty Senate, and I'm like, but we do, because there's fewer of us. And so I think with the other fields, man, there are, like you said, there are so many different journals out there. But yeah, there's always been politics in publishing. We could go back to some of the major studies that have been out there, all the way back to pre-World War II. If you went into some of those sorts of studies, the sugar studies, Kellogg's, all this kind of stuff, way, way back, there's always been politics in publishing,
Yes.
always.
So this is not new, what's going on.
Nothing.
Who you are, where you work at,
who you know,
This
who
is
funded
just,
your paper, who funded your
Yes.
publication, all of that has a role.
this has all been going on since science presumably started having publications. So let me ask this kind of related question. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but there are by some count 30,000 scientific journals now that are publishing in excess of 2 million scientific articles per year. Now, I am the number one advocate in line for free speech, right? I don't want to quash speech. None of that. My argument here, and I guess I'm giving up my bias instead of asking you the question directly, but is there a point, Beth, when, okay, so one journal is no good, right? Because we have so many great papers trying to get, that's no good. 30,000, my hunch is you get a lot of junk being published. And I've done this before myself. I have peddled a paper to a journal with a higher impact factor and it got rejected, and I worked my way down until it found a landing spot.
Yep.
Okay, my question for you is, in your field in particular, is there too much, in your opinion? Is it serving the public good still?
It depends. It depends on how the information is used. And so my old professor from MU said, it doesn't matter as long as the information gets out there. It doesn't matter who gets credit, as long as the information gets out there. He was very humble. He didn't care if his name was on the paper, as long as the information got out there. Another professor that I worked with the USDA, he said, it doesn't matter where you publish it, as long as it just gets published, because the information just needs to get out there. However, the problem is with interpretation of those papers. And, I was just looking up a very famous paper that got published in the Lancelot in 2000, whatever, that talked about autism and vaccines. Okay. Yes. 8 kids, 8 kids. And all of a sudden there's this huge correlation and people quit vaccinating their kids. Had the media not picked up that journal article, it never would have had an impact.
Right.
So it's the media. I mean, I was watching the news one day and it was this anesthesiologist, bless her heart, talking about how important veganism was. And they had her on there as a doctor, and she's a doctor, works with humans. So she must know the difference, and how we should eat. And I'm like, she's an anesthesiologist. Come on. That's not a nutritionist, but I think the media gets a little taste, and the media, and we talk about this in a class I teach, which is the animal welfare, animal rights class. And we talk about how the public, the media will put on somebody from a quackery animal rights group and give them the same credibility as somebody from Colorado State that has a PhD in animal behavior and has published, books all over the country and just is amazing. They'll put them on the same podium as if they're both equal, and they're not. And so I'm going to throw the media under the bus on that one, because the media can't read these papers and figure out what's junk and what isn't. And so a lot of junk gets published, and then the public they don't know. I mean, 8th grade education for most of the public, and they don't understand science. I mean, science is ever evolving for us. How are the general public supposed to understand differences like that?
So, and so this is a huge criticism of, I'll say, science in the era of social media, that expertise is not so much what you just said. Somebody who's dedicated their life, has taken this deep dive into this often very narrow, field of study, and are just, steeped in it. But if they don't agree with the answer that I want, I will go find another expert. I'm using the air quotes here, that may or may not have the same credentials, but they agree with me. So I can sort of shop my opinion, but the downside of that, Beth, again, I'm injecting my own answer into my own question here, but the downside of that is that it's hard to learn when all you're doing is shopping for opinions that confirm the one that you've already got.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing that in your world? I mean, go ahead.
I see that with the students, especially once they graduate, and I'm, on Facebook with them. And I'm like, dude, I taught you better than that. And they're shifting to where they're only looking for the information that confirms their own bias. And I think that's just human nature, to do that. Yeah. And so, but now that we have all this information, all we have to do is type or say something into our phone. I think that we can find all sorts of interesting information. I was just thinking, I'm going to call it the aldehyde dilemma. I was thinking about this when I was picking up my son. And I think we could make the discussion, you and I, that millions of people are dying because of aldehydes and acids. And people would be like, yeah, that sounds horrible. They're all dying because, they're eating aldehydes and acids. They shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, glucose belongs to the formaldehyde, or not formaldehyde, but glucose belongs to the aldehyde family in chemistry. Yeah, and acids are fatty acids that are found in beef and in Twinkies and in everything else that's out there. And so it's the aldehyde dilemma. And I could scare people by like, ew, that's got an aldehyde in it. You shouldn't eat that. Yeah, it's a Twinkie and it's just glucose. Right. And I think people are afraid. They don't know what they're afraid of because they don't know what they don't know. And so I was just thinking of that today. I was kind of funny.
Beth, do you think, I mean, there's always in the academic world, there's this saying, publish or perish. And, and the point of that saying, I think, is, look, if you're going to get into an academic track as an assistant professor, and you want to work your way up to associate professor, full professor, the way you do that is, yes, teaching is important, but you got to publish, you got to get grants, you got to build a reputation that's a regional or national or international one. And that's how it works. There's always been pressure, I assume, to climb that track and so on, others to publish. Do you sense that more over your 20-year career in academia? Is that intensifying? Is it about the same? Does it matter or what do you think?
So it's actually changing. It definitely is changing. And it's funny you should ask that, because it is just now people are starting to realize we got to specialize what we're good at. And I've been kind of saying this for a while, but so, at Mizzou and Texas A&M and Colorado State, these big land-grant universities that I'm more familiar with, not to mention the big schools on the East Coast, West Coast, but it is publish or perish. And then those of us at the smaller colleges are like, we will never be able to compete with them as far as publish and perish, but what we're good at is teaching. And so how about we start putting more of a focus on teaching rather than forcing our new professors to write some article that 5 people are going to read? Why don't we just let them do what they're really good at? They're at a small university like ours, because they want to teach, they want to serve, they want to help people. And I'm like, let's do it. Let's put more emphasis on the quality of relationships we form with our students, the quality of relationships we form with their parents, and with the general public, and let those big universities, fight for the money, fight for the publish or perish. I think we've got to realize that we can specialize, and we will never be Missouri State University. We will never be like Mizzou, and I don't want to be like Mizzou. I don't want that. I don't want to work in that kind of environment. And I think universities ought to do that. Chase what you're good at. You can't be good at everything. So as we're chasing students, and we are all chasing students now, kind of like a business, come to Missouri State. We are going to get to know your name. You're going to have my cell number. That's what we're talking about. And I think that's wise. I think that's in business, you have different departments. Yeah. Why not with academia?
Do you, Beth, when you read the literature in your field, are you more cynical about it today than you were 20 years ago? Oh, yeah. In other words, I mean, we've been talking now about just publish or perish. Where you're at makes a difference. Who funds you makes a difference. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like Dr. Elizabeth Walker, post-grad year number 1 was a different person, at least figuratively, than
Yes.
Elizabeth Walker year 20?
Yeah, I was a much better researcher when I first came out because I was trained very well by Mizzou and New Mexico State. I was trained pretty well. Now I focus more on teaching, and now I just know when something's wrong, but I don't know why it's wrong. And I can call people out on it, but I used to be a lot better at that stuff. But I think that it's statistics. It's really the crutch of all research is how good is your statistician? And if you know you're not good at stats, you better find somebody who is and have them on your committee. Have them helping you, because papers get pulled a lot because their stats were wrong. And you talk about a special sort of line of thinking. Statisticians are important. And it's hard. And so as a not statistician, I just can read a paper and tell when it's wrong, but I don't, it's the gut instinct. It's that lizard brain that says, I know it's wrong, but I don't know why it's wrong, but you need to go talk to a statistician.
Yeah. What's that saying? There's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics.
And there are, but they're important, because just like that one autism paper, 8 kids out of 50,000 that get vaccinated a year. Right. That's correlate. Right. That's not even correlation. I mean, that never should have been published. But you've got to have a good statistician from the get-go on some of this research. And I am more skeptical now post-COVID, because I've been told how to think in some ways. And, on Facebook where everybody was an expert, I did have a friend, and he's smart, he was up on research, and he kept telling, people like me who were still like, I'm not real sure where this COVID came from. I know the literature, the current literature, the literature that is being, popped out right now is saying it came from some critter out there. But as a researcher, I'm like, but research takes time. You don't have an answer 2 months after you see the problem. That's not how research works. And so I wasn't, when people ask me, well, where do you think it came from? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to wait and let the dust fall before I make a decision, because and that's what angered me a little bit, is scientists should have known better than to jump on the first paper or 2 that came out. That's not how science works. Yeah. And I don't even know if we still know where it came from. I have my own personal beliefs where it came from, but I may or may not be correct on that. And I wasn't about to spew that on Facebook. No way.
Beth, there was an article, I think it was published in about 2015 or so, but it looked at a little over a decade's worth of scientific, I'm going to use the quotes in scientific literature. There's something like 25 million articles published by 15 million scientists. And the conclusion in the paper, I know those are huge numbers, but it was that 85% of those 25 million papers could not be replicated. In other words, the conclusions that were drawn were exaggerated for what they really meant. And this, to me, and I mean, you can believe or not believe that study or not believe.
No, I've heard that before.
But, Beth, the underlying problem, no matter what the numbers are, is it's so easy to be skeptical now. Like this study, you were mentioning nutrition, and I'll just pull that out of thin air here just because we're talking about it. Over the course of our lifetime, Beth, how many times has the ideal American diet been adjusted in ways that are almost completely contradictory to each other? You should eat high carbohydrates. You should eat no carbohydrate, low carbohydrates. Animal proteins are terrible. Well, maybe not. Maybe they're actually, but it makes, as somebody, and I'm not an expert at nutrition in any way, but it makes you look at these things and go, does anybody really know what they're talking about? I mean, do people really understand this? And I guess I'm just saying, if you extrapolate from that small little example there, doesn't it make sense that people are a little bit skeptical?
And one of the biggest studies out there was it was just generally known as the nurses study, and it was a big nutritional study, and they followed these nurses for I don't know how long, a whole bunch of them though. And what did you eat? Well, of course you can't replicate that. So
Yes.
it's purely science because it doesn't follow, the rules of science. How do we investigate? And if you can't replicate, it's just correlation. And I'll be honest, like when I'm filling out a survey, or when the
Yes.
doctor says, so how much do you drink per week? You're like, minus, okay, that's how much I'm going to tell them.
Yes, I'm going to report the person that I want to be, not the person maybe that I am, right?
Like, well, last week I only drank, so I'm going to report that versus the 2 weeks before. I mean, none of us are innocent. And when we report stuff like that, and then people make it more than what it really should be. And so, I take everything with a grain of salt. When I read it, I'm like, okay, but, and that's just it. Like, you try to replicate something. Well, nobody wants to publish that. It's already been done. What did you do different? Right. Well, I thought I was supposed to replicate it so that we could publish it just to prove the theory. Oh, no, we're not going to publish that because it's already been published.
That's right. And journals are reputable journals, high impact factor journals are very unlikely to pick up a paper that concludes a dog did not catch car.
Right.
That's not exciting, right? Exciting is, listen to this, dog caught car. And here's what, but and you're right. I mean, I'm not a statistician either, but I know I've been fooled by papers that reported, significant findings that were just way underpowered.
Yes.
And we in the medical sciences, I mean, we've got a long track record of this, right? I mean, where we've jumped on the bandwagon of things way before, not way before, but before they were probably ready for prime time. I assume that's true in the other sciences, the physical sciences and agricultural sciences and so forth.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's always important to just read everything with a grain of salt. And that's what scientists are supposed to be, are skeptics. Yes. We are supposed to be skeptics. And then during COVID, we were told not to be skeptics. If you're a skeptic, and that's when it started sorting into political lines. And that really upset me. And I think it upset other scientists too, is we're supposed to be skeptical. That's why we're scientists.
I'm so glad you said that, because boy, I was particularly sensitive to it during COVID, because it sort of became this battle between the people who believe in science and I guess everybody else who by definition don't believe in science. And my family and I were back east last summer, and I saw this bumper sticker and it said, "I believe in science." And I thought, oh my God, this is unbelievable. I said, this is religion. This is how religion works. Okay, I believe. I mean, science, as you just said, Beth, and I'm sorry, I'm getting on my high horse here, but it is an iterative process, right? We are always testing, validating, changing, by the way, what we believe. For God's sakes, we don't do bloodletting anymore. Why? Because, well, we learned it doesn't really work that well.
We got to wash our hands now before we birth another baby.
That's right. It took us a while to figure that out, actually.
Right, it did.
But I guess this is when science becomes more religion-like. That, again, seems to me that we have taken science and tried to turn it into something that it's just not supposed to be that. It doesn't serve that role in the culture. It's, as you said, if you're a scientist, I hope to God you're a skeptic, because if not, and you're just taking everything on belief and reputation, and here's what I want to be true, that's a very specious path to go down.
Then you have no business in academia. You can't, it's the flat earthers, it's the deniers of the Holocaust. It's the same, but I think that we had this, and history repeats itself. And I think maybe, and I haven't read a lot on the history of medicine, but there was a time when if you were into medicine, then that was just quackery. If you were into science, if you were a surgeon, that was like way lower. That's what barber. Could be a surgeon.
Physician of barbers. That's right.
That's what they were. And so, and they were low on the totem pole.
Absolutely.
And now it's really flipped. Now the surgeons are the cool guys on TV, the McDreamies and stuff. And so it's flip-flopped, it's changed. And so, I think that there's always been a cultural thing with science. And I think part of it's because people are afraid of what they don't understand. And they're just trying to make sense of the world around them.
Have we, Beth, have we
if
made?
I trust Bernie Sanders because I don't know, then I'm just going to believe what he says because I don't
Right.
have time to look it up myself. And I think that's human nature. I do that not with Bernie Sanders, but with others, I do that. And then I try to catch myself. Wait a minute, Beth, think for yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Beth, have we turned science, in your opinion, have we turned science into something it's not? Have we turned science into, I'll just give you an example. So when Anthony Fauci gets on the television now, and I just remember this one quote he had. He said, well, you can not like me, or you can be against me, but if you're against me, you're against science. And I thought, no, wait a minute. I can agree or not agree, but that doesn't mean I'm against science. And I guess the question I'm ultimately asking you then is have we created, has science grown from something that I think answered questions, sort of helped us make progress, into something that's akin to religion?
In some ways, yes. And we've been around different, you and I have both been around the different cultures where, gosh, I was just watching some deal on, YouTube or whatever, and a plain community took one of their people that had some pretty bad mental issues to a chiropractor, and their cure was to just massage his head, and he ended up killing his family. And that chiropractor, to me, should be held guilty for practicing with something without a license. I mean, that's not what he's supposed to do. But we know that certain religious groups, and not that extreme groups, and that was an extreme, but maybe not as extreme. I had friends in high school that wouldn't, avoided going to the doctor at all costs because of religion. And I think there's always been something there, but I think Anthony Fauci has probably set science back because he's not a true scientist. He's a politician dressed up as a scientist. He's not a true scientist, but you must trust me out. And anytime I heard him say that, I'm like, nope. No. And I think he has hurt COVID and the issues, the political spectrum that we've gone down with COVID has destroyed some science, and it's really given people a reason to doubt.
Yes. I think that's a good point, Beth. I kind of feel the same way. Like, you mentioned before that science is sort of this slow iterative process. You don't answer a question 2 months after you ask it in most science, and most good science anyway. And, when I guess during that time, one of the things I just wanted to hear somebody say was, this is our understanding today. This is the best we got. Tomorrow. There's a lot that we don't know yet. So please get ready for me to come out tomorrow or next week and go, okay, new information. Because we got new information, I need to change my mind, and I need to change the recommendations. That to me is such a scientific thing to say.
And I never said it.
I got new information. I have to change my mind. It's not dogma. It doesn't have to fit into the world as I want it to be. It is the world as it is. And I'm sorry, we just don't understand all of this yet. We're doing the best we can. Give us some grace, or something along those lines.
And they wouldn't do that. And I don't understand why, because we all know that things change, but whenever we'd have the scientists up there saying, by golly, this is how it is, they should have just been honest with the people and said, guys, we just don't know right now. This is all new. The best people we have are working on it all across the world. And a little honesty would have gone a lot farther, but I think politics got in the way of good science. And politics always gets in the way of honesty. So I think we had two whammies on it. And it hurt the American public, and it hurt all of us. Our kids are behind. Their social progress is behind. It's damaged a lot of people. And I think all for the name of ego.
Let me ask you another kind of generational question, Beth. So I read an article about a month ago, and the author said this. She said, most of the time, it is the youngest generation that sort of raises the flag of a little bit of rebellion. like I'm not gonna do that. Probably the 60s and 70s are the most, at least the example that comes into my mind, where you had protests in the street, and there was a lot of reasons for that: the Vietnam War, racial riots, and so on and so forth. But her observation was this: in this generation, when you had this very controversial issue, masking, vaccinations, and so forth, that for better or worse, people just can't quite agree about it. But the people who disagreed the loudest were not the young people. It wasn't the Gen Zers. It was older generations that said, I don't think I trust that. I don't believe you. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, as someone who teaches a lot of Gen Zers now, why do you think that they were, at least between the generations, they were so quiet about that?
You know how we were talking about before, and I told you I'd read this book, and I think that children are not as mature. And so maybe we're looking at these Gen Zers or whatever they're called to start riding the streets, and they're playing on their TikTok. They're not engaged with what was going on. And I don't know, I'm just speculating. Maybe it was because they're 18 going on 12. I don't know, because you're exactly right. The college kids would riot. They're the ones that would throw the fits when, they called shenanigans for the world or whatever. And this generation is like, okay, I'll put my mask on. Meh. And it was people like you and me like, whoa, wait a minute, time out. Let's think about this. And the kiddos. Now, I will say in agriculture, it's a little bit different. My students generally in agriculture tend to be problem solvers and so a little more independent in their thinking, I'll say. Maybe that's politics, just the nature of agriculture, the nature of politics. But I had some students that would flat dab almost refuse to wear the mask. And I don't think we saw that in the other disciplines, but some of my students, they put it around their nose and be like, get it up. And they did that the whole time. And so maybe it's just different students, but you're right. They just, okay, that's what they told me to do. I'm going to do it. And that's not the normal generational.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've thought a lot about that myself. I'm not exactly sure, why that would be. We talked a little bit before, and this is out of my field of expertise, but, as religion has sort of ebbed in our culture and science has taken on, what do you want to say, a more prestigious or a higher place, maybe that, the younger generation starts to think, well, this is science and science is good. And so I believe the science without maybe questioning, I'm sure you and me and obviously about 160 million other people said, wait a minute, does this make sense? Does this work? Is this right? How, can we just pause for a minute and think? But anyway, I mean, it's all speculation, but
those of us who said, let's pause and think, were told pretty negative things by society or by the media. If we questioned what Dr. Fauci and what a few of the others were saying, we're made fun of. And so we kept our mouth shut.
I recall, again, we were talking maybe about COVID a little too much here, but there was a faculty member from Stanford. I'm blanking on his name now, but early on in the pandemic, he wrote an article that got picked up in, I believe it was New York Times and Wall Street Journal. He and two other folks who said, now, wait a minute, there's no good studies that say that masks really work. Right? Like I know, they sort of intuitively you think, well, that probably makes sense, but he's like, the data's not there. This is all, I mean, unless you're in the operating room and you're trying to prevent spittle from going down into the wound, like, are you sure that this is, and they were ostracized.
And so
that was an
like me,
unacceptable thing. And I thought, well, I mean, I wear a mask. Look, I got immunized. Listen, I'm on board, But that's a valid question.
It was a very, and there was some doctors out of California that came out with the YouTube and they were questioning stuff and they were told, hey, shut your mouth. You can't talk. And it may have been with the ivermectin. It may have been with the, I don't know what it was, but they still have the right to say it.
Yeah.
And their credentials say that they have some experience but they were shut down. And I'm not saying people should take ivermectin for COVID.
Right,
But I will say that if you are going to, well, I won't, but ivermectin, the Nobel Prize was given for ivermectin for parasites in humans. It's extremely safe. I don't know how it would work with COVID, but that's beyond me.
I don't know how it kills viruses, but
I don't know either. But if, some of the, when we were talking about wash your hands after, helping a lady give birth, what? You don't need to do that. That was crazy talk back then. But I also, we've seen this with agriculture where somebody who is very prestigious retires, they're not in the limelight anymore, perhaps. And next thing you know, they're being funded by groups whom before they were probably against. And they want to be back in the limelight. And all of a sudden they're starting to spew stuff that perhaps they wouldn't have pre-retirement. But scientists are just people. They're just people. They make mistakes, and the good ones will apologize and move on and learn from their mistakes. The bad ones don't. And I think that, like you said, with this COVID stuff, I think the good scientists said, time out, let's wait and see where this thing really came from before we start making these decisions about what to do and how to treat it. And
and there was a lot of fear during that time, and fear makes you do a lot of crazy things and maybe say things that in retrospect.
And that was kind of neat in these rural areas where I live. There's hardly anybody out here. I don't think we were afraid. We were just like, we're more afraid of the neighbor's bull than we are of this virus. And I think there was a huge cultural difference between where you live and how you saw this. And maybe they even talked like people in agriculture see life and death every day. We're faced with death. We're not as afraid perhaps as the people in these other cities, because I think there's a huge cultural difference between people that live out in the boondocks, in very rural areas versus city people. There's just such a huge cultural divide. And that's why I help with a deal called Bridging the Divide and trying to get people to talk. Like what you're saying is we should talk about religion. We should talk about politics. And I try to teach my students that when they get through with me, I want them to be intellectuals. And an intellectual is somebody who they may have a belief, but if new information comes in, they can change their mind.
Well, yes.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy talk. What do you mean I have to change my mind? Yeah. Intellectuals change their mind when presented new information. And that's what we should be striving to do.
There's that saying that when it comes down to the choice between keeping your own opinion or changing your mind, most people get started on the proof of why they don't have to change. I mean, it is human nature.
We don't like to admit we're wrong.
We don't like that, and we like some commonality, some things that feel like, okay, this is the bedrock, right? I don't have to change about this. I don't have to alter my beliefs about this. I understand this already. And it's, I mean, we all fight it, regardless if
life is ever evolving, and life is always evolving. We all have to change. We all have to adapt what our perceptions are. If you had said 20 years ago what I'd be doing now and who my best friends were, I would have been like, I'm not gonna be friends with those kind of people. And now they're my best friends. Like, I never predicted. But luckily, if we keep an open mind, hold fast to your values, but that doesn't mean you can't change your mind on stuff. You just stay who you are.
I think that's a very important point, Beth. I mean, we are in an era when the polarization, I think, has been there for a long time. I mean, the country's been polarized, at many points in our history. But, the thing we're seeing now that I think is dangerous is we're demonizing other people. If you are not in my tribe, if you're not in my group or the group that I perceive as similar to me, then you are not only different from me, but you are the devil.
You're
How
evil.
could you? I cannot culturally, you are incomprehensible to me. And that is, I just would submit, is a very dangerous kind of thing for a country that wants to be cohesive to start doing.
And I think, when I read, I'm listening to a book right now on, did FDR know about December 7th? Did he know that we're, because I love World War II history, and in my world, everything goes back to World War II history, even though I'm in agriculture. But the politics back then, it was no different, but we didn't have social media. Yeah. It wasn't in our face, but the people who were trying, and it was some magazine, maybe New York Times or Cold or something. They were looking at photographs of FDR, and they were like, and they were already supporting Dewey. They didn't want FDR, but they're like, but we can't be biased. Now magazines are like, yeah, we're biased. So they put the picture of FDR that made him look the healthiest instead of the pictures where he had blue lips because his heart wasn't working and because he had fluid around his lungs. So they influenced a important political election because of politics, but because they didn't want to look biased. And so I think that was a really good point. Nowadays, though, they're going to put the ugliest picture of whomever they can find. I mean, Hillary Clinton can't be that ugly, but my goodness, every time we see a picture of her on Fox, it's the ugliest picture they can find of the poor woman. So,
but Beth, we see this in science as well, where if you can't attack the theory, if you will, or the science, go attack the person. The person is bad, and anybody who's bad can't be saying things that are worth you listening to. And I mean, that is the quickest way to undermine somebody, and it works. It's sort of negative politics, except on in the scientific world. And that is very disruptive. Have you seen it in your field?
Not in my little field, but when I read about some of the history of research, history of nutrition, history of a lot of, the historical texts that others have looked into it, because I like history a lot. When I've looked into that sort of stuff, just chasing down animal welfare issues or animal rights issues, and I start reading the history of where all this came from, it's no different. They chased the person, not their idea. If they didn't like their idea, then they went after the person. What kind of dirt can we find on them?
Yeah.
And it's no different, I don't think. But now we have, cell phones and watches. You can look up anything on your watch now, and TikTok. It just
gets out there so much faster. And if you are a scientist and you're thinking, maybe I should publish something or write something that is contrary to the conventional wisdom, boy, you better have your big boy or big girl pants on, because they're probably coming for you.
There's a great article. I don't remember the author, but he presented to Journal of Animal Science and kind of one of their big, let's think about this, but it was on Agent Orange. And was Agent Orange really that bad for people? And you're like, well, of course it was. And then you read the stuff that this guy had the guts to say, and I didn't ever get into it, but it was an interesting article because he dared to question the scientists. And wow, that took guts.
No, and you're right, Beth, in the era of social media. So let's say he wrote that article 30 years ago. You're probably going to get some hate mail. You might get somebody that calls you. I don't know. But, you can, in the next hour, you could have 4 million tweets that say you're the worst person that ever, walked the face of the earth. And again, everybody has the right to do that. But all I'm saying is that probably quiets down a lot of dissension that might happen, because not everybody wants to put themselves through that.
And we need dissension. We need people that disagree with the norm, because sometimes the norm gets off, right, left, wherever.
That's right.
And we've got to pull each other back where it needs to be. And that's the only way we do it is with people that are brave enough to disagree. And even if they're wrong, like I even had one of my ex-students, he's now in the house up there at Jeff City. And he's like, you taught me how to think and how to question. And that's what he sent me a thank you about. And I was like, that's exactly what our politicians should be doing. They should all be questioning. They shouldn't just go thinking that they know all the answers. If you don't question science, if you don't question norm, then how do you strengthen your own bias? Or if you never look at the other side of the argument, you
Yeah.
can never strengthen your own position. And I think that that's why we have to have free dialogue, free
Yeah.
speech.
I think that's well said, but there's a difference between certainty and confidence, right?
Mhm.
Certainty is a belief in your beliefs. I can't question it. I mean, a confident person would say, I think this is right? I've tested it. I've gotten feedback, but you're never sure, because you got to be open to that possibility that you're wrong. And if you don't have that opening, I'll say, in your mind, I think it's very hard for a culture to make progress. But
Yeah, and I think you have to be confident enough to be an intellectual. It all goes back to being an intellectual. And if you can't be confident in who you are, and I think a lot of that is maturity. I know I wasn't near as confident, or if I was, it was based on stupidity. When I first got out of grad school, I thought I knew everything. And it took me a few years to realize I was, I was pretty stupid. Yeah, I had a lot more to learn. And that's what I tell people in my science classes, that the more I learn about science, the more I know nothing about science. The world is too big.
Oh, that's so true.
And I tell students, I'm like, sometimes nature doesn't read the book.
No,
and
that's so true.
Surprise you.
I forget who said it, but education is a slow reveal of all the things that you don't know.
Mm-hmm. And the more I learn, and that's what gets it exciting for me to teach, is because even if I've been teaching a class for forever, I'll read the textbook, because I actually do read the textbooks I make my students get, and I'll read it again, and something will stand out to me, like, how could I miss that? And to me, it's the most cool thing ever, and I can't wait to share it with them. And I've already got it highlighted, like it just didn't click because something didn't come to me. I just didn't know enough to realize how important that was.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, it goes back to having confidence that I don't have to know everything right now, as long as I keep learning and have an open mind and read 100%. Stuff that maybe I disagree with, but that's okay. Those people have the right to be heard.
Yeah. Completely.
And respected. I mean, if you don't respect somebody with a different opinion, I mean, some people deserve respect, some don't, but we can have respectful dialogue.
Yeah, if we don't, democracies fail because they can't do that right there.
And I love talking to people that have a different opinion of mine. I think it's fun.
I think, Beth, I wish more people felt that way. This hour has flown by as I knew it would. But thank you very much, Dr. Walker, for joining me this evening and talking about from some very interesting things. Really appreciate your perspective.
No problem. I look forward. I need to start reading your books. I'm a book nerd, but I haven't gotten to your books yet. But I will look forward to them.
Okay, I appreciate that. All right, thank you, Beth. All right, I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.